Thanks so much for the introduction. It's great to be here. My name, as I was introduced, Jason St-Cyr. I live in Ottawa, Canada, and I'm currently leading our developer relations efforts over at Sitecore. Today, I'm going to give a little teaser of the talk that I'll be delivering, which is about becoming a leader. Really specifically, the very awkward situation that you get into when you are a member of the team and then suddenly change over to leading that same team. I know that when I was doing this a couple of times, when you make that transition and you go from being just one of the team to then leading it, it's usually because you've shown some sort of expertise to your upper management, right? Yeah, you're very opinionated, you're very passionate. Maybe you're really good at working across departments or up and down the chain, whatever it is. Somebody sees that you have what it takes to take that next level. And so they want you to take this on. And then all of a sudden, your former colleagues are calling you boss. And I found that when doing this, it can be tough. It can be tough to make that transition to, go away from being the hero, being the person who's building the thing or making sure the lights are staying on or, changing stuff in the data center. You suddenly switch from getting something done, getting that dopamine hit from getting the task complete to the strategic work, which could take months, quarters, years before you actually see something happen from the work that you're doing. So it can be hard to let go of that side of the world that you're used to being on. So today I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges I went through myself, and hopefully you'll be able to learn a little bit from that and want to learn more. In the full session, what I cover is 5 key challenges. So first, how do we get rid of stuff that we're used to doing and start delegating, getting away from doing independent work, more management stuff? Secondly, how do we look at decision-making differently? How do we not know what's going to happen, but still make decisions? And next, I would dive into trying to switch the mindset off of being the expert and suddenly having to be more of a coach. And I also talk on the kind of fun middle part of middle management, as well as a section that's really important to me, which is about mental health and trying to prevent burnout if you can. Now, obviously, we don't have a lot of time to go into everything. So today we're just going to look at the first one, which is letting go. Now, you may have noticed from the imagery I've used so far that there's a lot of toys in the theme. I'm a dad, I've got 3 girls, and I find that telling stories and trying to embed learning moments in it allows it to really resonate. And it resonates with me the same way. Because stories give us this kind of emotional connection to something. If you're a Star Wars fan and I told you, let the Wookiee win, you're going to transport yourself immediately. You know what part of the movie I'm talking about. You know what's happening then. And that's what we want to keep. Is we want those easy recall moments. We want what are those things that are going to twig me to remember what I learned and what was then. So today I'm going to be talking about stories that created learning moments for me. And those of you who are out there learning how to do this on your own, try to think about how would you create those recall moments for yourself. Now, the first section that we'll talk about here is all about delegation. So that's for today. And when I spoke with colleagues and managers, it seemed like a lot of us were going through the same thing when we went through this transition. In general, when you're inside a team and then you start leading it, you have all these tasks that you're used to doing every day, and it gets really hard to let it go and really move on from that role. The very first management role that I took over, I was in a small product company, startup. I was leading the R&D group, and super great people, really great team. I really loved it there. I was doing a lot of development work, and then I switched to leading that team, and I was still doing a lot of development work. Years later, when I look back at it, I realized I kind of gave myself a choice. I said, you could take almost a decade of expertise in this, toss it out the window, everything you're good at, and try to learn this management thing and do it well. Or you could try to do a little bit of each, not do either well. Or go the win-win road, be a great dev and be a great manager, do that really well, right? Like Of course, I went with that option, right? There's no downside. I learned the downside. I went with that. I learned about SWOT analysis. I learned about product management, release management, and I learned out how I could burn myself out in under a year. So what happened in that situation? I found it super tough to give up all the stuff I was used to doing. I knew I could do them in my sleep, and it was going to take me a huge amount of effort to get somebody else to be able to do that. And not only that, now I'm managing the team. I know what's on everybody's plate. Everyone is super full. So if I'm passing my stuff off, that means something's getting dropped somewhere. And I didn't want anything to drop. I'm a new manager. I want us to like do better than we were doing before, right? Not do less. So I wanted it all. Nothing dropped, no priority decisions. Wanted the easy mode. And eventually I burnt out. And I left that job and I went on, and that left, somebody had to pick up those tasks anyway. Somebody had to make those priority decisions, except now I wasn't there to lead the group. I wasn't there to help somebody transition into it. And guess what? They did fine. My friends who were there, who still were, I was keeping in touch with, they were able to adapt. They were able to go on and in some places do way better than what was happening with somebody who was burning out and doing 2 jobs at once. So that was a big learning moment for me, is that I was holding that team back by not spreading it out. And I've had this kind of model repeat a few times in my career. And every time I've done this transition into leading the team, I found it hard to let go. And I try to get better at it each time. But it's always like, I know I have to delegate, and I know there's stuff I shouldn't be doing. It's not too long ago, I trained up somebody on how to upload videos into YouTube. Like, this is not something I should have been doing for years on our team. But it was something I just kept holding on to and not taking the time to delegate it out. So I know I needed to get better, looking at my tasks, deciding what is the priority for my role now, and what is something I can get to somebody else, right? So what is more strategic? What is more execution? Now, if a task is strategic, is driving the team, that's probably something as the leader I should be holding on to. If something literally anybody could do with maybe some access and minor instructions, I got to get rid of those right away. Now, the tough one that I found was learned expertise. And by that, I mean, somebody else could learn it, but maybe I'm the only one who knows how. And it's a bunch of onboarding and ramp up, a lot of effort to get somebody else up to the level I'm at. That is a really tough one to go, because the amount of effort that goes in is far less than me continuing to do the role. Now, I refer in the subtitle here about the sled and the driver and the reins and the pulling the sled. If you have somebody who is doing the hard work to make the sled go, it has to get somewhere. Someone's got to pull the sleigh. And you need a driver who's going to be keeping their eye out, course correcting, trying to make sure we're getting in the right direction. Together, you get where you need to go. But it's really hard to try to do both those at the same time. You can't effectively do it. So what did I learn from all of this, right? I learned, well, one, I cannot do 2 jobs at once. That is not for me. I should not do that. And what I can see now, looking back, is that I was also blocking the team from them growing, getting new skills, expanding their capabilities, doing it better than I could. So part of me delegating was, yes, lightening my load. I needed to stop being the bottleneck. I needed to make sure also the right work went to the right people who had the right expertise. And ultimately, it came down, I had to trust my team. I'm not going to say I've solved this completely today. I still probably do too much work that's on the independent contributor side, but it's something I try to get better and better at every day. So I only had time today to go through this kind of first section. And there's a lot of more stories I'd love to tell you. Hopefully, you'll be able to join the conference at the end of July, and we can go through all these other challenges, like different ways of decision making, and stop wearing that SME hat, and middle management and mental health. But I think we have a little bit of time left, if I'm not correct. If we have any questions from the audience, anything we'd like to go into, I'd love to hear what you're thinking. And
yeah, I'm glad to be here, with everybody. My name is Pablo. You pronounce my name lovely. A lot of people have trouble with it, but that was perfect. As you said, I'm coming from MasterClass, but before that, I spent 3 years at Facebook building reliable systems, and then at Google in the SRE, in a couple of SRE teams. And it was very interesting to see how these two big companies think about reliability. I like to talk about the difference between one or the other. We don't have time to do that today, but we'll be doing it in the presentation in July. But it influenced a lot how different SRE can be in different companies, and even more when you go to a small company like MasterClass. So when I joined MasterClass, I discovered that there is a strong software engineering culture there, focused on delivering new features for our users, for our students, but the SRE culture was lacking to some extent. Of course, there was some incident management, there were metrics being gathered, but we don't have a lot of alerting. There was a lot of on-call rotations. Everything was focused on one single team, the infra team, which is the one I'm managing, and that's definitely not scalable. So I started having multiple conversations. I have conversations downwards with my team about how we should be changing what we are doing, offloading some of that work, sharing it with other teams in engineering. I talked also with other managers how we could support them, but also how they could improve on their own and be more self-service. And I spoke upwards to the director of platforms, to the VP of engineering, to try to advocate for a stronger SRE culture. Those conversations went well, and then I got the headcount. I can hire my first SRE, a situation that many of you might encounter yourselves in, or you want to span a new team. So what do you do from there? Building SRE is different depending on different companies, depending on the size, depending on how much headcount you have. For example, at Google, if you want to span a new SRE team, you need at least 12 people. You need 2 locations, you need follow the sun, 2 teams, in order to ensure that nobody is on call more than X% of hours. You cannot go to a small company where there might be 200 engineers and say, hey, to start SRE, we need out of the box 12 engineers. Because the first question is going to be, what are you going to do? So that's not the way to suggest it. The other big difference that you can find in a smaller company where the culture is being defined is that you find a lot of people talking about DevOps, but is DevOps the same thing as SRE? And there's a lot of literature, a lot of opinions there that I would like to explore during the talk, but briefly TLDR for me, they are not. They complement, they overlap, but there are different things, and it all starts with how do you hire people. So I went with the headcount I had, and I tried to hire my first SRE. But in the meantime, I was also trying to grow the SRE culture. So you can actually hire your first SRE internally. You can finalize, you can convince people to do 10% of the job as SRE functions. So you start spreading the work to get more people on board. We need more engineers to work on those tasks, get the tooling in place, be using it. So I started doing that also with my team, mentoring some engineers in my team, so we could be more voices, helping others and growing that culture while we are still hiring SREs. How to hire an SRE? You have to define really what you are looking for. And that's a longer conversation that we are going to explore through what are the key components that you should be exploring, what are you interviewing for, how to map your interview process, and how value what you are seeing from the candidates. We don't have time today for all that. I hope I will see all of you in the end of July for our conference to speak more about it.
So I'll go brief, and I'll try to give you a teaser of how, in my session late July, you would learn how to accelerate quality with open source test automation frameworks. And actually, if you look at what Jason was saying and Pablo, they talk about, offloading and sharing responsibilities to be more efficient, and how to build a site reliability engineering. It all comes at the end of the day, all of these practices and all of these things and load balancing between skill sets and resources at the end of the day are towards delivering better software, right? That's what we're trying to do in the software business. We're trying to build new functionality that works from one software iteration to the next. Our software is always available online and accessible. And to do so, we need to follow some practices. We need to have balance between our skills, resources, team members. And yes, we need to monitor our platforms in production, pre-production, and give the right feedback in time, shift left, shift right, all these buzzwords, right? So in my session, and as mentioned earlier, I've been writing a lot of books around how to really shift software quality left, so you do deliver high quality software. But one of the highlights in my slide, I've been in this software industry space for more than 2 decades. But recently, I became an ambassador for one of the leading open source framework for cross-browser testing, which is Cypress. Cypress is a front-end web development solution, allows both developers and test engineers during software development, during web application development, whether it's with Vue.js, React, or other technology, to really do in cycle, within the sprint, efficient software test automation. So they do this shift left, they do get the right feedback in a timely manner, so they release with high confidence to production. In my session late July, what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk, of course, why would you care about open source software test automation frameworks? So I will tie it to the current digital market trends, what's happening in our marketplace right now and in the coming years. What are the challenges that these things are posing to software developers, SREs, test automation engineers? And then what's the role of the open source frameworks in this overall, infinity loop of DevOps, right? Continuous integration, continuous development, continuous testing, continuous everything, right? And then, of course, I'm going to give you a taste of some of the leading, there are so many, but at least a taste of some web and maybe mobile test automation frameworks with their capabilities, so you can, be convinced and understand exactly what can you get today, which you, by the way, couldn't get a few years ago. The marketplace evolved not just from features and applications and smartphones and websites. It also evolved from open source technologies, and one of them is obviously the automation frameworks. So at the end of the day, I'm going to talk a bit about how open source is going to allow you to shift from left, basic legacy testing towards testing in every build, or testing even upon every commit with the power of open source, because you see this gradual maturity ladder and how much kind of you gain by shifting your maturity towards this continuous testing mantra that people are talking about. So open source plays a big and actually a huge role in enabling the transition from left towards the highest degree of continuous testing. I'm going to talk a bit about, I mentioned earlier some trends. I'm going to talk about some single code-based applications that are invading our marketplace, including progressive web applications, PWAs, Flutter by Google. So Pablo actually comes from Google. I'm sure he heard about some Flutter development while he was there. Flutter is currently a de facto technology that drives web, mobile, and desktop applications using a new programming language called Dart. So I'm going to talk about this evolvement, but also what it means from the digital transformation, because it does require a new mindset, if you like, to really deliver applications based on Flutter, which is also open source, to the marketplace. I'm going to give an example of a rich media application led by Apple, the App Clips. It's built on top of iOS, but it's not really a native app. What does it mean? And it's kind of a nice example or a use case of how you need to think about continuous testing in our nice digital landscape nowadays. I'm going to dive also during my session and give you some taste of technology. Okay, we are in a technology event at the end of the day. So looking at some different levels or different types of open source technologies, from the WebDriver-based technologies to the Chrome debugging protocol landscape tools, Puppeteer and Playwright. Google and Microsoft are behind these new technologies. And Cypress, being an ambassador, I know quite a lot about Cypress, but one actually can complement the other. And I will talk a bit about these three open source technologies, technology stacks, if you like, and how you can utilize them for your own goals. You can see here that open source is king. You see the numbers here. It's just Node.js. This is just JavaScript. You see phenomenal numbers of downloads across just a subset of these open source frameworks. It means, A, there is adoption, there is value, okay? And they actually fulfill some of these objectives that I was talking about earlier, to shift left software test automation, to enable you to do higher quality software activities earlier in the cycle. I will also, during my session, cover a bit about the mobile frameworks. I mentioned a bit about Flutter, but I will also talk a bit about Appium, Espresso, and XUI test, and how they play a role in the native mobile application landscape. And you know, this is just kind of because we are giving a teaser. I'm giving you a teaser about Flutter specifically because it's an open source, and the uniqueness of Flutter, and you will learn more in the session late July, is that this open source can generate a binary that works on Android, iOS, Linux, Mac, Windows, and Google Fuchsia, and it's written in a whole new language, programming language called Dart. And as you can see on the Google Trends, and I don't know if Google is that biased because it's Google Trends and this is Google technology, but still, I have my own client base that really is adopting nowadays Flutter. So it is a growing technology that kind of embraces this single code base that I was mentioning earlier. So you do want to consider and learn about that. An example of some advanced technology within open source is about component testing. This is component testing within Cypress technology, and this is, in my mind, a huge transformation in the concept of shifting left software testing, because component testing is not something that you would find in Google, in Wikipedia, or any other place. People know, how to break the test pyramid into unit, API, integration, and exploratory testing, right? So this component testing is a new concept that kind of mounts components like pieces of your website and kind of isolates them for you to do testing. So think about a developer that just delivers or builds a component on a website. He can use component testing technologies capabilities within the open source of Cypress and do the testing only on the isolated piece of software. And this is huge because it's a bit bigger than API and unit, and it's smaller than end-to-end testing, but it gives you great new feedback and value. So that's kind of a nice example of just a subset of things that you're going to learn late July. This is just a sample of a code. I will just leave it behind, but I won't spend time on that. And with that, everyone on the call, I will stop because I hope I gave you enough appetite into what I'm going to talk about next month. But this is my pitch. This is my area that I'm going to cover in just a couple of more weeks. I hope you like it.